Okay. We will have, I'll do an introduction, and then we'll ask Anne to speak, then Laura, then Rula, and Nadine will support me, and then have an intervention later in the third part. And then I think we're good to go. So anything else, technically speaking? Everything's fine, I suppose. So the chat function is open. I can see it. So people will then be able to comment on the talks, and then we'll have a discussion afterwards where people can then be unmuted and actually use their own camera and speak to us and take part in the discussion.
And
so
it's quite,
exciting. I think it's going to work.
And it's quite helpful that, sorry, just quickly, Jan, it's quite helpful that all the names are in alphabetical order for participants. So if we need to find someone.
Yeah, it starts with Anna Godfrey from BBC Media Action. I can see her. No, Anna, there's people even
Alexandra.
Advanced in the alphabet. Alexandra
Buccianti.
How do you pronounce that? Yeah. Okay, and at the bottom of the list, Sensele Ndeble, yeah. Right, so for those who've just come in, I'll start in a minute. But there are still people joining us. I think I should give it a little time. Martin Scott is here. Welcome. Michelle Foster, Patricia Torres-Bird, Peter Whitehead. These are big names in media development, so we're really excited that these people are coming. So it's great. I'll start in a minute.
Nice as well to see some people in the chat.
Yeah.
DW in Myanmar.
Okay, I think I'll start. We have two minutes past the hour. So, dear colleagues, I'm really delighted to virtually have you all to discuss the Media Viability Indicators of DW Akademie with us. The title of the session is "It's Time for a New Conversation about Viability, especially in times like the current COVID-19 crisis." To tell you the truth, this is a premiere for me. I haven't done this before. It's the first time I have this large an audience that I e-meet or e-moderate. My name is Jan Lublinski. I'm head of policy and learning at DW Akademie. And the session we've planned together with my colleagues is in 3 parts. We will have classically 3 panelists who will very briefly introduce the subject matter to us. Then we will allow for questions and answers. The questions and answers we will run through the chat function, so there you can only write short questions, and then they will be asked by answered by the panelists. That's the second part of the session, and the third part of the session will be an open discussion where you will then actually be invited to use your own camera and make brief statements, please, so we can move on in discussing the topics. Before we get started, a few virtual housekeeping rules. Please be brief and focused in your communication. My job will be to interrupt you if you are too lengthy. This holds true for the speakers as well. I also need to tell you again that the webinar is being recorded, so be aware of that. It's all open here, and it would be good if you speak or write that you just state the organization you work for, so everybody gets to know you as well while you speak or comment or ask questions. Before we get started now, I'd like to introduce Nadine Jurat. She's in the image next to me, I think, on the top of your screen. Nadine heads our media viability team at DW Akademie, and today she'll be supporting me in organizing the chat and in clustering your questions. So bear with the two of us if we don't manage it all. It will also be on you to help us a bit in getting a good discussion going. We will try our best in any case. So now for the first step, I have 3 extraordinary speakers, 3 brilliant ladies, Anne Hollifield, a media economist and professor at the University of Georgia, then Laura Moore, head of research and evaluation at DW Akademie, and Rula Mikhail, director of Maharat Foundation in Lebanon. So we will start with Anne. Anne, would you please tell us about the challenge and the definition of media viability today?
Thank you, Jan, and thank you to DW Akademie for inviting me to join you today. I think we're all here because we share a very deep concern about the future of news media around the world. And of course, we have an immediate concern about the impact that COVID is having on news media, both in the global north and the global south. It has been called by many experts an extinction or near extinction event for some news media, particularly newspapers and local news media. And I think we're certainly seeing evidence of that already. But the reality is that the crisis that we're facing actually began almost 30 years ago, around the time that we saw the major political and economic transitions around the world. And it simply has accelerated, particularly in the last 10 years. And of course, it's been re-accelerated yet again in the last 6 months with the pandemic. But I think in order for us to be able to talk effectively about the solutions to the problems that we're facing, we need to begin by understanding why we're having these problems in the first place. Said another way, why is it that an industry, the news industry that has thrived for more than 600 years, has unraveled essentially in less than a decade? And the answer to that comes from the fact that news media are information products, which means that they have economic characteristics that are very different from the economic characteristics of consumer products that most of us learned about when we were in school. The problem is that with digital technologies, they interacted with those economic characteristics of information products to create problems that most managers and most industries never face at all. One of the key information characteristics that we see that's causing us problems is simply the fact that information has so much value in society, including having the value of owning and controlling the sources of news and information. With consumer products, when you start losing money by producing a product that there aren't enough people to buy, like a bicycle or a car, a company will simply stop producing it and go out of business. But how many of us who are on this webinar this morning posted something to our Facebook page this morning or tweeted something to our Twitter account? And if you did that, were you expecting that someone was going to send you a check in the mail by the end of the day to thank you for your thoughts and wisdoms and sharing? And of course, the answer to that is no, you didn't. But you still, despite that, you still produced and distributed the information that you wanted to share, which is part of the problem that we're having. So let's take a look at this.
It's good, we can see your screen.
Okay. So what we have as a result of this is we have hyper competition because of digital technologies. And hyper competition basically means that we have people producing more content around the world than audiences have time, money, and attention to consume. And digital technologies, because we have so many content producers, also have produced more advertising time and space than advertisers can possibly use. And that's why we're having the crisis that we're having with media viability. And this, of course, impacts even publicly funded media because all of the hyper competition and content is making publicly funded media redundant in the eyes of many people, which threatens its funding as well. Some people say that media viability is all about money and that we should be focusing only on the financial aspects of media. But in fact, research shows a couple of things that are important for our later discussion. One is that politics and the legal system in which media are embedded are often the best predictors of when a country's local news media are going to start facing problems, that when you see the political system starting to deteriorate, the news media's financial situation follows quickly. And the other thing that we have seen in research is that there are multiple ways that you can combine the various viability factors that Laura will be presenting in the list of indicators to cover for financial problems or to help compensate for them. And we also know that from research that there are a lot of non-financial resource problems that media are facing that we also have to address if we care about news media viability. And the fact of the matter is, of course, is that the COVID crisis right now is drastically shortening our timeline for finding sustainable solutions to these problems. So what exactly is it that we mean by news media viability? Basically, media viability is the ability of media outlets and media landscapes to produce editorially independent, high-quality journalism that serves society and economic development in a financially sustainable way. And although we are facing a crisis, I'd like to end my part of the presentation on a note of optimism, which is that the COVID crisis, while it is shortening our timeline for finding solutions, also is accelerating the kinds of solutions and options that we have. People are thinking about news media and its future in enormously creative ways that we have not done before. People are feeling a new urgency to finding solutions to these problems. And we are being jump-started. We're breaking down the existing structures that have slowed our ability to address these problems, so that I think that we're going to see ourselves jump-starting the industry into new directions in a way that would have been much slower without the COVID crisis. So my final words are this: let's not let a very good crisis go to waste. And with that, I'll toss it back to Jan.
Great that you can, turn it positively at the end, at least. So how do we solve this crisis? I think the first possible step are the media viability indicators, and Laura, please introduce them to us.
Yes, thank you, Jan. Thank you, Anne. I will share my screen with you as well, because I think we need some visualization to be then able to discuss the media viability indicators. Did that work?
It's good, it's there.
Super. Okay, I like Anne's optimism of the opportunities of crisis, but I think it's also very important to reflect on where we stand. And when I say we, I mean media practitioners as well as media development experts, also donors, of course, and academics. Everyone basically who's interested and working on the topic of media viability. And I think the reality at the moment is that we are searching for the right answers, but we are very often also searching in kind of a dark environment, not really knowing and lacking information that we need in order to design substantiated strategies, to come up with systematic approaches. We often speak a different language when it comes to this. Sometimes we mean the same thing but call it differently. Sometimes we call it the same but mean different things. And that is also sometimes, I think, hindering a good collaboration in this field. So this is exactly when the new media viability indicators come in. The aim of this framework of indicators is to gather data and evidence that is really sorely needed for a better overview of the viability of media systems and media outlets. So that's both entire media landscapes, but also, of course, the specific media outlet or media organization. We also need a better understanding of the situation to identify concrete gaps and challenges. We need that for more effective and fact-based strategies, as I said, and approaches, and change the fact that we use different terms and different understandings, but rather try and develop a common language about media viability that will also improve our collaboration and coordination. And this is the goal of the indicators. When we look at this set of indicators in detail, we can see that it is structured around 5 dimensions. These are the dimensions of the media viability model that was developed by DW Akademie as well, which are politics. And politics, let me say first, all different dimensions have 5 key indicators. So overall in the MVIs, there are 25 key indicators with which you can try and assess and better understand media viability. So the politics dimension looks at the political legal system surrounding news organizations. So questions like rule of law, also access to public information. In the economics dimension, the indicators measure news media revenue models, the overall strength of the economy in a country, the situation of competition, but also audience demand. In the third dimension, the community dimension, that dimension looks at the nation's social structures, citizens' attitudes towards news media. So questions also like participation and whether audience data is available. The fourth dimension, technology, focuses on the availability and access to communication technology and infrastructure. So, but also things like citizens' digital rights, which is important in that dimension, and the question whether news organizations have digital expertise as well to kind of hold up with innovation, technological innovation. And then the last, fifth dimension, content and expertise, contains questions that refer to the quality and independence of the news content produced and factors affecting that, which is, of course, journalism expertise, but also ownership of media and business structure and also business expertise. The time is too short to show all the different indicators, but just so that you get an idea, this is just one exemplary MVI key indicator focusing on ownership. So each key indicator has several sub-indicators. Overall, there's 119 sub-indicators included in the MVIs. And this one, for example, looks at whether news media ownership is in the hands of only a few companies or families, whether it's transparent, whether the owners are not tied to government or other powerful interests, and also whether the media owners generally respect the editorial independence of their staff. That's the overall structure of the MVIs and the indicators themselves. It's really important to bear in mind that the MVIs are a flexible framework for assessment. So that means that you can use them to get like a general overview of the situation in of media viability in an entire media system of a country. In that case, you will want to use all indicators and apply all indicators to get really a broad overview. And if you're more interested in the situation of individual single media outlets, then you could only apply the indicators focusing on media organizations. And if, for example, you're only interested in, say, the community aspect of media viability, you know, participation, community engagement, trust in media, things like this, then you can also just apply and look at more detail with one dimension. Also, you might have seen that there's a big methodological framework as well, which shows that it is possible to score each indicator, each sub-indicator, and come up with an overall score for media viability in a country, but this is not absolutely necessary. So you could also use this framework of the MVIs to do a more qualitative assessment of media viability. The application of the MVI so far, we have done a pilot study in Lebanon, which we are about to publish. Also from the side of DW Akademie, we're applying at the moment the indicators in East Africa, 3 East African countries that you can see here, focusing on the media outlet level. And we have, in addition, developed a 2.5-day assessment workshop called V-Sprints, Viability Sprints, that allows our partners and media owners to identify their main challenges and also priorities in improving their viability. So that's more of a kind of consultancy and assessment workshop that we have piloted and we will be doing with more partners in different countries. And which we're really happy about is that some other media development organizations have started to consider the MVIs or applied them already. Among them, for example, Free Press Unlimited. We're doing a research on viability, considering the media viability indicators. Also IREX and BBC Media Actions, a big primed project, is also kind of based on the indicators or considering the indicators for the work. So yeah, so much as a short overview. If you have questions, feedback, criticism, please here later today, or also use the this email address. We can also put that in the chat. I think we're very open and interested in your feedback, and especially, of course, the criticism, because the overall idea is really to you know, enhance the discussion on that complex topic with this, and also learning and improving and revising the MVIs. Yeah, I think we're just at the start. Thank you, Jan.
Excellent, Laura, for this introduction. And yes, please put this email address into the chat so people can copy it in peace. I think it's important, if you have really very detailed technical questions on single sub-indicators, then please put them rather in an email. I think the discussion now should more focus on the overall concept and the possible applications of this. And you're now invited actually to bring your questions into the comment box. But before we answer the questions, we have the third speaker, Rula. Rula, you have been hands-on with the first DW Akademie test that was actually shared with Maharat Foundation and DW Akademie, the first assessment in Lebanon of these indicators. Can you tell a bit how it went?
Yes, thank you, yes, and hello everyone. When DW Akademie elaborated the methodology related to the media viability indicators and approached Maharat to assist in doing the pilot in Lebanon, we thought it was a very good opportunity to Maharat. At that time, we have already launched our DMV lab and the media management course in the Arab region. Of course, we understood the gap related to viability in the region, but testing the methodology, the collection of the data, and reaching this result came to endorse what we already knew. And it gave us also a scientific tools. Laura was like detailing that we have like 5 dimensions, we have like indicators and sub-indicators, and all these details really, it can help us to understand more and more the media landscape here in Lebanon. This is definitely important in a region and in a country that lacks research and studies on specifically on media viability. With all the transformation at political and economic and digital level. Of course, Maharat was involved in the selection of the people that should be consulted for this methodology. And we thought a lot about who should be consulted. For every indicator, we selected a person who could really provide relevant insights. They were representative of diverse media, different types, in addition to legal, academic, and market expertise. We learned a lot through the process. When we attended the interview, it was interesting to us to see how the consulted people started seeing the linkages between the different dimensions of the methodology. We cannot think about business model without like thinking about a legal framework, for example, or about a community response. Also, it was very interesting to us that the methodology came to support our adopted strategy at Maharat Foundation based on media literacy, quality content, and entrepreneurship. Of course, the methodology, as you mentioned, gives a theoretical analysis for the ecosystem that could, but maybe it could be enhanced with practical cases for deeper understanding. And I have like one more comment on for the recommendation, for example, related or elaborated through the process, through the methodology. This recommendation should be validated with the local community at later stage to fit within the context, political and freedom related. Of course, the indicators and the pilot are definitely of importance to our work, especially within our partnership with universities, supporting them, redesigning their curricula to meet the new trends of media viability. And of course, we look forward to other pilots in a new country to compare findings and start building more on shared lessons learned on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Rula. Excellent. So we got a first impression, and there'll be more questions to you. I already see them coming up in the chat, Rula. So this was the first part. The second part will actually be the chat and the questions we pose there to the speakers. But let me remind you, there'll be a third part where you actually will be invited to join the discussion in speaking, and there I would actually encourage those organizations who are actually already considering the media viability indicators to maybe consider to have a brief statement first, because this might then, you know, give a better impression to the others who are interested in this, and then they will also be invited to join the discussion. But maybe I'll start with a question that's directed to Rula, as you're still there. It's Abir from Internews, who was wondering if Rula could tell us from her experience 2 or 3 things that we should avoid, take care of when doing this data collection. Maybe then Anne can also add to this, but Rula, maybe you give it a start. Your suggestion.
Yes, the selection of the people that we will with them. It's very, very important, because for each dimension we have to think carefully about the people because their insights is very important, and really it can like lead us in the right direction. Collection, selection. Also, we have to make sure that also the people that we choose really understand the methodology and understand very well how we will be using later on the results. And the third point may be, and I already mentioned it. It's very, very important to link it to the local content. For example, sometimes the recommendation are like international standards. Sometimes the international standard doesn't really work well in context that there is no really protection for freedom of expression.
Okay, thanks. Maybe just a brief add on to this, Anne, because it's how to approach this if you actually want to assess. And what would you suggest? What is really important?
As Rula said, finding the right people is the key thing, and she did just a fabulous job about that. I think the other thing refers to something Laura talked about, and that is being flexible in how you approach it. And I know this has come up in some other discussions Laura and DW Akademie have had with their partners, that it is not necessary for every person you talk with to answer all of the 119 questions, that you can tailor the data collection to the expertise of the individuals with whom you're speaking, which makes the process much more efficient. And what I think our experience in Lebanon showed is that very quickly you'll find that there is, when you talk with at least, say, 5 people on each indicator, that you'll find the ideas and the opinions and the information that you're getting coalescing quite nicely. So it can be done fairly efficiently, and you get really terrific insights. The one other note that I would make is something that we mentioned in the paper, which is that given the scoring system that we have, it is not, the scores do not tell you that indicator 1.5 is more important to media viability than indicator 5.6. That the scores are all on the same scale. So you really have to use your own critical thinking to understand and listen carefully to your interview subjects to understand which characteristics are most important in a given media landscape. But the indicators will give you an indication of where you need to focus your efforts and be thinking creatively.
Thanks, Anne. Maybe Laura, I will ask you to answer the political questions. Maybe I can combine 2 questions to you, Laura. One is on what is the relationship to the media development indicators developed by UNESCO many years ago? And maybe you can also answer the COVID questions. Did you adapt this framework in any way to the COVID situation, because this will maybe give you the opportunity to explain what this indicator system is for in relation to the existing MVIs, but also to the current situation.
Yeah, thank you. Two things. First, the media development indicators by UNESCO. We've had this discussion. We've also had this discussion with UNESCO directly, and as some people might know, we work directly with UNESCO as well on kind of extending the MDI, the Media Development Indicators framework. The very big difference to the media viability indicators is that the media development indicators are really looking at the overall situation and environment of a media system. The media viability indicators have a very strong focus on viability, while the media development indicators don't really. If you look at the media development indicators, they don't really have the issues of like financial sustainability in them. They're very much more focused on the legal, political, regulatory frameworks. So they're broader and wider in scope. Also, a difference is that I think the media viability indicators, as we said, are much more flexible in the way they can be used and on the different levels as well. Right, the media development indicators are solely for media systems. The media viability indicators not, as I tried to show. The question on COVID, no, we have not changed the indicators because also, you know, time-wise, they just came out when COVID started. I also don't think that it's necessary because the aspects of that are important for media viability don't really change per se. With a situation in crisis. Of course, the findings will change a lot, but the aspects that you should look at when you want to get an overview and then assess media viability, I would say remain more or less the same. This doesn't mean that we should have a look into it and see whether there's new aspects that we didn't think about when we developed the indicators. I think it's more that some aspects will be stronger. Of course, even more strong, the financial part and the question of revenue sources, especially for media outlets that have revenue through events and things like this. But I don't think it would make sense to change them due to this situation of crisis.
Okay, Laura, there's one question here. I'd like to stay with you because then we can have the theoretical framing done, maybe to some extent at least. There's someone asking on the financial sustainability definition, the traditional definition of financial sustainability. How is it seen from the MVI perspective? I don't know if you can see the comment yourself, but
I can't see which one you're at now, but
unfortunately I don't see the name of the colleague here in my chat list.
How do the MVIs relate to a more traditional definition of financial sustainability of media? Am I correct in seeing an overlap with the category economic and perhaps the subcategory business expertise and the category content and expertise? Yes. So it's not that one dimension stands for itself and only covers one certain topic, while others, because as you know, everything depends on each other and is related to each other. But I would say the dimension of economics really looks at these kind of hard economical facts that Anne can explain much better than I can. You know, the strength of the economy in general, also the ability of people to actually afford media products, the questions, as I said, on like audience demand and competition and the problem of hyper competition that Anne mentioned earlier. So that is a very strong focus, and I think that kind of covers the more traditional financial sustainability question. The indicators or sub-indicators looked at in the dimension of content and expertise are really more kind of like a structural business part of media organizations. and the question whether they can hire staff that have management knowledge, and whether structure-wise, there's a separation between marketing departments and the editorial departments, things like this. Does that answer the question?
I think that's a good answer, Laura. Maybe we do it this way. We have another question for Anne, and in the meantime, maybe Nadine, if you could come in and maybe cluster the remaining questions. I know there was one from South Africa on how to predict. Maybe you can rephrase them and direct them. But first, Anne, I would ask you to answer the question on oversupply of advertising. How do you measure this kind of phenomenon in an applied setting, not as in media economics, but in our media development setting?
Right. And the answer is we don't really know. And it is a topic that has not received nearly enough attention. If you think about the fact that digital technologies have produced essentially unlimited opportunities for advertising supply, and virtually unlimited numbers of content providers who are trying to sell advertising onto their blogs, onto their websites, etc. The amount of advertising available simply hasn't increased at the same pace as the advertising supply. So of course, economics 101, that not only means that your advertisers are spreading themselves out across all these different content providers, it also means that the price of advertising is falling because there's so much oversupply as compared to demand. And the simple fact is we're not going to solve that problem. We can measure it, and these indicators do give us some tools for measuring that, but it also suggests that we're going to have to find very new revenue models, and I think we're making progress in that direction. And Jan, if I could also speak briefly to the COVID question, if you don't mind that, because we are working on that on the East Africa project. There is essentially no research available that looks at news media organizations in the middle of a natural disaster, or in this case, a pandemic. But what we do know from the very little bit of research that exists on business resiliency and continuity of other industries in the face of natural disasters is the key element for surviving a crisis like the one that we're currently in is the innovation capacity of the organization itself. And the indicators do have measures of that. And so they are useful in looking at that. But if that's something you want to measure, take a look at the innovation capacity and the creative management indicators and sub-indicators and be focused on those and applying this.
And there's another question from Anna Godfrey at the bottom of the list. Maybe you take a look at it and think about it. I'll come back and ask you about it. But Nadine, maybe you could give me a bit of orientation help here. What have I missed out?
Well, going back to basics, a question for Laura from David Lush. What are the MVIs based on? Seeing that, as you said, we lack information about what makes media viable, what evidence are the MVIs based on? In some respects, we need to know what makes media viable in order to measure it.
Yeah, absolutely right. And that was, I think, the big challenge, obviously, of this. And that's also why I think, and as we say in the paper, this is a suggestion, and why I said we're at the start. I think we are not there yet. We've tried to include the results and research that we have, and maybe Anne can say something about it because she's been researching media economics for 20 years at least. But so we, as Deutsche Welle Akademie, we had quite a long process of thinking together with partners what it is actually that we should look at when we talk about media viability. We quickly came to that point that it's more than money, because there's so many aspects, relating to this. And then we tried to, from the different kind of sources, research, but also work on the ground, dialogue with partners. We tried to come up with these clusters and dimensions. And maybe you want to say something about the research side.
And your microphone is off.
Sorry, yes. We started with the basis of what research is out there across the broad spectrum around the world in terms of the kinds of things that we know affect media management and media economics. And then we, of course, expanded that to look at what we know about other industries as well, because the media economics and management field is fairly young. So that was our basis. And then, of course, we also, all of us have media experience. We drew upon our practical experience. We talked with a lot of partners, and we spent months vetting this with getting reactions and feedback and trying to refine what we're doing. So there's a lot of thought and a lot of research went into this. It is based on academic and social science and economic research. But another question that Jan asked me to address is, what about the equal weighting of these issues, and how we don't yet have a measure for factor A being more important in market X than factor B, which also speaks to your question. And that is, the reality is we don't know that. I mean, Laura and DW Akademie have phrased the indicators in light of climate change. And that's a really apt comparison, because in climate change, we do have some relative comparisons that we can make, that doing one thing is more harmful to climate change than the other. And in the media industry, we do not have any data on that at all. And so these indicators will help us begin to gather that. As more and more people apply them and share their data with other partners around the world, we'll be able to look and see what is falling out of the indicators as being most indicative of predicting whether or not a particular media organization or sector in a particular ecosystem is going to have more or fewer problems. And in fact, some of that work is already being done.
Okay, so what I'll do now is, Laura, I'll pose the question to you on the predictability of the indicators, and Nadine, maybe you would then just point me to the two most important questions that I've missed out on, and then we wrap this section up, if that's okay with you. So Laura, there's this, I don't know if you've seen the comment, unfortunately I don't see the name, but somebody has studied in South Africa the effect of COVID-19 already now. And the interesting question, I think, is how predictive would the indicators be on the extent of damage to local media in a country? So could you use these indicators based on a situation analysis and say something?
Yeah, I think that it's the same person also putting the corona question, if I'm not mistaken. But so it's about predicting and finding trends. I would say my answer to that would be, if you, maybe first of all, by applying the indicators, you get an assessment of the situation at the moment. If you apply them on a regular basis, then obviously you get like developments and also maybe can talk more about trends. But I would say generally that it's hard to predict things by using these indicators.
Okay, so that question was by Reg. And now I see James Dean has BBC Media Action, and Luminet has also entered the discussion. Maybe we take a look at his comment, Laura, and then Nadine, is there anything you think we should answer?
Well, there was another question on the effects of public service media that Anne mentioned at the beginning, and yeah, the question from Chloe Howcroft. Can panelists please explain the role of our relationship between public service media and media viability? As Anne briefly mentioned, how news media crisis and increase in content competition can impact publicly funded media.
I think what we're seeing around the world, there's been a lot of talk that the solution to the essentially the hyper competition among revenue models in commercial or at least partially commercial media, that the answer to that is public funding of media. The problem with that answer is that publicly funded media around the world are also under incredible pressure because of the breakdown in the systems that we're seeing. In many countries, from Japan to Europe, you're seeing private for-profit commercial companies putting incredible pressure on the political system to defund public media, because the publicly funded media are in fact additional competition for the commercial providers who are already in trouble. And they're also taking that argument to the taxpayers and saying, look, you have so many choices, you don't know what to do with them already. Why are you being required to pay user fees or taxes or whatever to support publicly funded media? It's redundant, we don't need it, let's get rid of it. And in a time of budget crisis, of course, that's a message that a lot of political leaders in a lot of countries are only too happy to hear. So public funded media is in trouble itself from those issues. And even in countries like China, where you have state controlled media, the explosion of media content is actually putting pressure on Chinese media executives. I work and teach in China on a regular basis, or have in the past, and have had those conversations. And so even in countries where there's state-controlled media, you're seeing the same kinds of pressure. So public funding is not an easy answer, and the indicators will be helpful to people working in state and publicly funded media to also assess their own issues.
Excellent, thanks. And I found out actually that I can pull over my comment column and then actually see the names of the people asking questions. Maybe I'm not the only one who has this problem, but now I can see your comments. And maybe Laura, I don't know if you've had the chance to look at James' comment. I mean, James is saying this is a nice, a good instrument, but we cannot, change many of these aspects. And there are only a few where we can actually achieve impact, and they're all related to money, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I know James' opinion on that. Yeah, and of course that's true. Like, but I think they're important to have this overall overview and to identify, if you look at the media outlet level indicators, to identify the gaps there. And I think actually that's where these V-sprints that I mentioned come in, because this is where, based on the media viability indicators and the aspects that we think are important, we develop this more hands-on consultancy workshop that actually has a much more kind of intervention, or priorities on the ground aim. And I don't know whether Nadine.
Well, yeah, let's have. I mean, Nadine. You were the one who. I'm sorry. Let's have a short, change in plans here, because Nadine is the person who has invented the V-sprints, as we call them, and this is just an example for how you can actually do something. Would you introduce that concept very briefly, Nadine?
Yeah. So no, that's absolutely fine. I think, also my answer, maybe also to James to pick up on that, is yes, of course, it's about money, but I think the little money that there is needs to be applied in the most effective way. And some of these things, like political or legal challenges, they take a long time to change, if they can be changed at all. But we need to identify the ones that where we can have impact, and we can have impact, all of us, who work at different fields, different levels. And for impact at the media level, or for media organizations, and that can be commercial media or community media, to understand or to understand what we call the media viability mindset, and to start looking at their business strategically, we've developed this assessment, a facilitated assessment, where we go through all the different aspects of media viability step by step, with everyone involved who works at the media, or at least one from every department. So admin people, journalists, editors, if they are fundraisers, because they are funded, donor funded, also fundraisers. Because they need, I think it's important that everyone understands that each of them play a very important role. And yes, it's 2.5 days. It will guide them through, like I said, in a fun way, we hope, step by step. And in the end, they will have a list of priorities that they need to look at. Because from what we see, or what we experience, is that a lot of media, it's such a complex issue that a lot of media don't even dare to get started, or they don't know how to get started. And the V-sprint, the viability sprint, and an assessment form that we've also developed, that we will publish soon, is just to get started, to think in that direction, and to look at the priorities.
Thanks. I think, if I may add to this, Nadine, one of the beauty of this is that we don't come with answers. We just guide people to answer the right questions. And this is, I think, the whole mindset of the media viability indicators, and all the tools you may develop from them, is that we don't tell people what to do, because we simply don't know. But we know about structuring the question process and how to set priorities, as you say, Nadine. This is just a short, idea of what could be done, but this is on the micro level of a news organization. But of course, similar processes could be addressed to networks and other levels. Right. I would now actually, I know there's many questions that we haven't really answered, but unless you see something really important, I would actually now want to move over to the third section, where we wanted you actually to also speak and tell us. And I would like to start, if that's possible, with those 2 or 3 organizations who have actually started considering or testing or thinking through the media viability indicators, because then things might become a little more concrete. But I haven't planned for this. So if there's somebody from FBU or BBC Media Action, would you prepare to just have a 30-second, present thinking ahead of what Nadine and Laura and Anne and Wula have just voiced?
There's also a question directly to FBU, basically asking how an international NGO like FBU can possibly use the indicator. So maybe that.
I hope somebody of FBU is here.
Saskia is here. You can unmute her, maybe.
Yeah, well, we'll have to wait for Saskia to unmute. I remember, Anne, that you had something to say on the question we had previously discussed. And is there still something on your mind that you could bring in? And then we'll ask, but maybe Saskia, if you could find a way to come in, but also maybe Anna Godfrey or somebody who's been in the planned project could also say how this could be of use, or where the limitations are. That's also equally fair to stress this. But Anne, first of all, you.
I was just going to add to what Laura said in regards to the question about money. And yes, of course, as both Laura and Nadine said, money is always a key issue. But we do have research that shows that if the outcome we care about is not just the profit margin of the media company, but the content quality of the news that it's producing in the service of society, then we know that different combinations of these variables that are being measured by the indicators can be brought together to create better content, and they will create better content beyond just simply having a lot of money. And so hopefully these indicators will not just be an assessment tool, but they will inspire people to creative thinking about how to work around some of these long-term problems so that we reach that outcome that really matters, which is content quality.
Thank you. As I told you in the beginning, we're still learning to use this kind of dialogue. And it's not an equal dialogue because we had to unmute Saskia before she can actually speak. So we will have to find a way that whoever wants to speak now maybe writes it in the chat so we can then unmute him or her. And we'll find.
Saskia is unmuted now.
But Saskia,
yes, I'm unmuted. So this is Saskia from Free Press Unlimited. I'm the head of knowledge and quality, and it was interesting because we started a viability research just when the media viability indicators were discussion at or were actually being developed at Deutsche Welle. So we had, I think it was like half a year ago, we had our first conversation of how we can be, somehow using the thoughts of Deutsche Welle for our research. And we found that the indicators were very inspiring because we wanted to do research among small independent media outlets globally around the world. And we, by now we have interviewed 100 small independent media outlets, and we use the indicators to formulate, to design our questionnaires. But we also, in addition to that, have asked lots of open questions so that we can then, with that additional information, we can check whether the media viability indicators are actually complete or whether they make sense to these type of media organizations. So in a month or so, we will be able to give you some feedback on the indicators and the usefulness for this type of research.
But it's really very useful. Thanks.
It's very much about the viability of these and sustainability, financial sustainability as well.
Yeah, and we'll try to find a way to share these experiences so we don't make the same mistakes all the time again. Actually, I've looked back at my notes while you were speaking that also there's this hands up function in Zoom. So if you don't write in the comments that you want to join, you can also put your hand up if you want to speak. I'm sorry, I'm learning. But thank you, Saskia. So Anne, I think you are also unmuted, aren't you?
Thank you, Jan. Yeah, it's Anna Godfrey here from BBC Media Action. First of all, I just wanted to say thanks to the panel and congratulations on the media viability indicators. I think we feel that they offer an important framework to sort of move forward our collective learning and measurement around media viability globally. We know that media all over the world need to come up with new ways to ensure their survival, and we also know we need to get better at understanding and assessing the enabling environment that both limits and supports media outlets. And I think that's where the media viability indicators are really important and powerful about the assessing both these areas, individual media outlets and entire information systems. And I think that while many of the indicators, if you like, aren't new and that we've been using them in media development research to date, the frameworks are really important, makes important contributions to two key areas. I think it is about the coherent framework to organise our analysis and thinking across countries and contexts, and giving us a common language. You know, we have historically been talking at cross purposes on some of these issues. I think that's where we think it's really helpful. We've been looking at them, you mentioned it within our PRIME project, which is a 4-year consortium programme, which is about protecting independent media for effective development. It's looking at adapting effective or adopting effective business management and production models to support media viability in Bangladesh, Ethiopia and Sierra Leone. And during the co-creation that we're currently in, we're looking to see how we can draw on the media viability indicators at 2 levels, at both the sort of system level and also with individual media houses. We probably won't be looking and drawing on all of the indicators, but focusing on those ones which are particularly pertinent to our goals. So around things like financial sustainability, credibility with audiences and public interest media impact. So we're really excited to sort of also have DWA as part of that consortium as a technical advisor to work with us along the way. And we've already started having conversations with Laura and Dennis about how we can take them forward. I think one thing to sort of flag is I think there's a big journey ahead, and Laura sort of hinted at this, and we're really keen to learn how you've adapted them to date in Lebanon, and we don't sort of underestimate the process of learning that needs to go into really applying them in practice in multiple countries. And I think the convening together around that would be really important going forward. So there's an exciting role ahead, and we're very happy to be rolling up our sleeves to get involved, and congratulations on getting this far. And I hope that we can collectively contribute towards a clearer evidence base on media viability around independent media, especially in fragile and resource poor settings, which we just don't know enough about at the moment. So thank you.
Anna, that's a really good statement, especially to actually say that maybe in a few years from now we should have an evidence base on this, and not just only questions and possible paths, but also have learned what worked and what hasn't, because we're at the beginning in this, aren't we? Actually, I like the comment that Heather Gilberts of CIMA made here, that we need to have a collective effort to collect the learning on the MVIs, on the application. So I think this should be on us, that we find a way to do this. So thanks for that comment. Again, is there somebody who has raised her hand? Nadine, is there anything? Anybody who still wants to use the opportunity to directly move on in the discussion?
I mean, there's a comment from Jason Lambert saying that they have a very similar set of indicators which they have used over the years. I don't know if Jason wants to comment on that live and speak.
You would then have to unmute him if you can.
I can unmute him.
Jason, you can still refuse, but I read your comment and it sounds interesting. It would be interesting.
Yes, and he's also. Okay, I think, yeah, now you can speak. Yes, hi, Jason.
Great, well, thanks for this. This is just a fantastic initiative. I guess some of you know Michelle Foster, who's my partner in NewsGain. We've been working with these kinds of issues for a few years. And I guess the issue that we found is that when we're working with media development, we tend to take ownership of this process, where what we'd like to see actually is that a lot of the media outlets start to get more engaged in this process and give us more of the source material or source data themselves. I think what we've seen as well with the COVID process, we've had to kind of step in and do some more kind of rapid response type work, where even we've had to break away from our normal process of going through all these different questions to baseline data or baseline media, and then figure out how to make interventions that are suitable for them. And I think what we found there is that we need to get to the heart of the issue a lot more quickly than we have done before. Yeah, I think the point about this is that we need to explain, also when we're working remotely, that we need to build coalitions for change. We need to not just speak to one person at a media outlet to get this kind of information, but to educate more people inside these organizations to get them fully behind the process and engaged in making change. So I think you've got a great opportunity with this. If everyone's getting behind these kinds of indicators now, and these specific ones, it's to think really carefully about deploying those and how to put those into the hands of the outlets so they get more up to date and to be more engaged with the issues behind them.
Yes, thank you very much. This is a very good remark. And I think the outlets can then pick the issues they want to deal with, and other actors should be using other aspects of the system and decide on where they can act and where possible change can be achieved. Yeah. Thank you. We've talked for an hour, but I think we can run a little over time if there are urgent things that we should still mention. And I think so. This is the last chance for any one of you who still wants to, come into this discussion.
Law from GFMD said he would like to speak.
Yeah, excellent. Please go ahead. We need to unmute again. Sorry, I could do it, but I haven't.
I think Tom can now.
Hi, yes. I'm unmuted.
Terrible.
Hi, everyone. No, I just wanted to reply to Heather's comment about how to gather information about the process of using the indicators in different contexts, and then and to that, and what us at the Global Forum of Media Development are in the process of doing is to create an online resource center to gather exactly this kind of information, not just about this particular project, but about media development and support for journalism more generally, to provide everyone in our sector insights into how various different projects operate and how they can be improved, and not just kind of best practice, but also, as was mentioned earlier, things that if you were to do the project again, you would avoid, and so we can all learn from that. So that's what we're going to be working on, and we started working on. So I'd like to invite everyone who's on the call. We would be very open and looking forward to working with you all to share the insights that you're going to pick up along the way from using the MVIs and other projects that you're doing, to make sure that this information and this evidence is available to more people to make better choices about how they design projects, but also about which projects are prioritized when it comes to funding.
And maybe this, and maybe this leads on to a question also from Samir, going back to COVID, asking whether there's a link or overlap between the MVIs and the EINER group at the Reuters Institute that's looking at or gathering data on the impact of COVID on media organizations. That's more data that's being collected, and it's probably very useful for everyone to share.
Samir.
Laura? Laura, do you want to answer? Or?
Yeah, I thought Samir was going to
I can unmute Samir during this time. While you're answering.
Laura, you do a first attempt, but then if Samir wants to speak, we're happy to hear from him.
Yeah, I mean, I know about the initiative around Rasmus at the Reuters Institute, and I know, that SEMA and also others, Facebook, Google, are part of this. To be honest, I don't exactly know what the goal is for that. So I can't really relate. So no, there's not been a direct kind of contact during the development, or I mean, if they would like to use the indicators somehow, then of course we'd be happy. But what I understand, it's more about also getting information connected to the idea of the International Fund for Public Interest Media. So
Laura, actually, James is once again very kind to help us in the discussion here. The very last comment is that the EINER is a very short-term, at the moment, ambition to inform donors quickly on financial needs, and truly the MVIs are more, at the moment they're a question toolbox and an orientation scheme, but hopefully, based on this discussion, this will be, as James says, more long-term and systemic, in the sense that we come together in a new way in this crisis to structure our thinking and our experiences. Which
of course, you can use some of the indicators as well for short-term.
Yeah. James, do you want to say.
Yes,
I've unmuted you, so if you want to comment.
Thank you. I don't have much to add. It is the International News Emergency Response Coordination, so it is very much an emergency. But it's basically come from a lot of donors setting up funds very quickly to target money at media who are suffering as a result of the COVID crisis. And the concern was, particularly amongst a group who had been involved in the development of the International Fund for Public Interest Media, that there wasn't very much coordination, and actually was it clear that this funding was going to what media most needed right now. And so this is meant to be a rapid research exercise to try and guide that response now. I don't think it's maybe, and I know that there's also conditions around not sharing the data because of the way in which they've collected it. So I don't think there's a strong crossover, but clearly they're linked. So
yes. And I think we're learning, thank you, James. I think we're learning at the moment that it takes several initiatives and approaches at the moment, and you know, there's mutual learning by seeing at what approaches the others take. And you know, the Prime project actually shows that it actually works if we, you know, join forces in some occasions. And I think this whole discussion gives me the hope that that we can move together in this crisis and build new approaches and test them and inform each other on what worked and what didn't. I think we're almost at the end of it, Nadine, unless Samir still wants to say something clever, which he always does.
I think he had to leave. I think he had to leave. I can't find him anymore.
So I would, you know, if somebody, I would leave it to one more statement. If somebody has one more thought, maybe from the panelists, also one last remark that is of help here, because I think we've had a lot of information, and I think it's just a first orientation on this. But is there something, Nadine, that you spot? Otherwise, I think we should not overrun it. I think it's really kind that you've stayed with us 7 minutes longer. My radio practice is that you should stop at the hour. So I think we leave it here. This was much more than I expected, and it worked thanks to your help, thanks to your discipline. I know this is stressful, this kind of conversation. It's not always perfect, but I think I will take time now to read the thread of the comments in peace. And for me, this was quite inspiring, and I hope some new ideas were in it for you. I think we've learned that it really takes the right questions to approach and these things, and that it takes a discussion with our partners on the ground to advance things. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can we save the chat and the questions? And can we see who asked the questions so that maybe we can, you know, get in touch? And...
I saved them, yes.
Super.